Good morning. Because I believe you are all very special people, allow me just to say thank you for having me and all the protocol observed. I have been asked to share some thoughts with you on a very deep issue of transformative leadership on the continent. I must confess, I don't think I am qualified for that. So I'll deviate a bit and just share a bit of my thoughts on what have been some of my engagements in recent times in the framework of shaping the Sustainable Development Goals and how the African agenda align and how it can be complementary. Africa has adopted the Agenda 2063. It's a very ambitious one. It has been welcomed by everybody, and it is now being translated into policies, strategies, and trying to make it workable by the different stakeholders of what our common home, Africa, is. In the meantime, the global family adopted in September last year the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And the life of SDGs is much shorter than our African agenda. It is only 15 years. So I think I'll dwell into that because it's much less difficult, not to say much easier, it's less difficult to deal with the practical things of how we transform the way we do business in 15 years than trying to do it for 50 years. It's just a matter of practicality. I was privileged to be one of the panel members who produced the first draft of SDGs and to offer it to the Secretary General. And then the Secretary General, of course, brought together what had been also developed by the consultations of 50 countries and the consultations of the sustainable solutions. And then we ended up with what we have now as 17 goals and 169 targets. I think it's an impossible thing to implement, but there's one point I would like to underscore. We made it clear that it wouldn't be possible to achieve the goals in 15 years if we do not radically change the way we do business. All of us, from global to regional to country level. There was a need to take time to absorb what we have agreed as a very ambitious and very transformative agenda, and to translate it, if you like, to domesticate it into the specific realities of every single country. And in our case, to domesticate it into the 54 countries we are. It's all known, and we agree that we are very good in adopting, issues and policies and strategies in Addis, if you like, wherever it is, the summit of heads of states. And sometimes even with the ministers when they meet in a day-specific areas. But what is missing in our ability as Africans is to move from the continental agreements and now to bring them home and make them owned, to make them owned by the majority of our people. And when I say owned, it's not to be informed. It means to be stakeholders of that agenda and take responsibility and be accountable for what is required to achieve as nations. So we also have been talking about the implementation gap. All those things are very, very well known to us. So what do we recommend as a first step to implementation of SDGs, which for us as Africans is the 15 years, if you like, or even a little bit more, of our African agenda? Sit down, led by governments, bring together private sector around the table, bring research institutions, bring technical training institutions, because they are not always, research, but they are a backbone of whatever we want to achieve. Civil society organizations in their diversity, some of them are advocates, others are really getting their hands dirty implementing part of the national policies. But it means unions also. It means to bring everybody around the table and say, where are we today? And if we are to achieve in 15 years the ambitious, very ambitious goals which have been agreed upon, how do we develop a national pact? Some would call it national compact, but national pact. A national pact, it's more than what we have done, for instance, in South Africa with the National Development Plan. We have consultations, we agreed upon, and then the implementation of National Development Plan, it depends on who wants to, including the government itself. You would question whether the decisions which are being made year by year are really anchored on the National Development Plan. But in the National Pact we're talking about, it's really to go to the detail or defining clearly what are the responsibilities of government, what are the responsibilities of private sector, what are the responsibility of unions. It's not only to demand, but they also have to deliver, okay? What are the responsibilities of research institutions in terms of generating knowledge and to allow that decisions are made on the basis of solid and core knowledge of what is had to be done and how, particularly how it can be done. And finally, to have civil society organizations and the subnational institutions. Subnational, I'm talking here of, in our case, we can see clearly, is the municipalities are huge and they're very, very, very important. In numbers, they take millions of citizens and they have a certain degree of autonomy. So they have to be brought as stakeholders, as what we could call subnational institutions to sit around this table. What is our experience today? Is that many of those plans really, they are not put on the table as responsibility of everyone. When we say responsibility, it means also to define clearly the steps and the goals to achieve in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and then in 15 years' time, where everyone knows it's my responsibility. It's not I'm supporting government, and government is not saying just producing policy. No, you say, this is what I'm going to deliver as government, and this is what private sector is going to deliver. This is what research institutions have to deliver, training institutions have to deliver, civil society organizations have to deliver. Once we agree, we sign up to that, and then we establish a mechanism of accountability. How do we account, each one of us? So from the SDGs, one is to change the way we do business. The second issue, which is also extremely important, is not all African countries, in our case, they have reliable data. So you do not know exactly when you say leave no one behind, but who is who? Who is left behind? Where is he? What kind of a person he is? This information is not always available. In South Africa, we are fortunate to have statistics which you can say they are reliable. But we are talking continent, and the NEPAD Business Foundation is working continent. We need to encourage and to support even institutions who have to provide us with reliable data. So one, change the way we do. Second, have the right information as data. Third, establish these national pacts and have mechanisms of accountability where everyone has to say what I'm doing, how I'm doing, how far I have reached and achieved the kind of compromise, of pledges I have made. The second thing I wanted to share is that business are possibly the only community government listen to. Many times they don't listen to civil society organizations, but they listen to business because they know it is really a strong ally in implementing economic and social agendas. But there's one thing. I was asked to talk about skills development within this context. There's a huge mismatch between what are the skills we need in private sector and what our education systems are producing. There's no way. We have to take this as a serious task. Reform education systems on the continent. And reforming them, it means to sit down now, it's particularly government and private sector, and state clearly what are the needs in terms of skills we are going to need in the next 15 years. Generally speaking, business, they have a clarity and plans for more than 15 years. They know where they want to be in 20, even in 50 years. So you are much more organized, even more than governments. You need to bring this to be transformed into a national agenda. And because of this, then go through the system and say, what are we wasting money, in many cases, investing in a product which is not going to be used? Not necessarily in terms of employing people, but to make people critically thinking and engaging with national issues. If we are to be honest, millions of our young people who come out of the education systems on our continent, they have a very, very weak knowledge base. Even what they were expected to know, so they do not have knowledge. They don't have the ability to think critically and to see themselves how as citizens and how they are actively building themselves, building their communities, but building the nation while they become, global citizens. They just do not have those tools. Our young people, when we come to skills, then it is a disaster. So we invest millions, and in this country it's billions, but what we get out of systems, it doesn't serve much. We have people with diplomas, we have people with certificates and all this, but they are unable then to even to start a business for themselves. So we need to take this as a seed. It's because it's a public investment. It's a taxpayers' money which is going to education, but it doesn't serve the economy, it doesn't serve the society at large. So I propose that as a very important task is to reform this. And it means also to indicate clearly in detail, sector by sector, what you would be expecting to receive, and when you receive, how are you going to gradually keep them updated, because also, technology changes very, very, very quickly. So I think we need to build a proper balance between what is general knowledge and the technical knowledge. It is extremely important, I think. And this has to be provided, as I said, by private sector, because it's the one which knows better. So please put in your agenda how you are going to contribute. Engage government seriously. And of course, when we talk to government as well, we are going to be saying this. We started saying this. The other area of reform is public sector. In many of our African countries, public sector is one of the biggest employers of people, but not all of them are productive. We have a very heavy public sector, a public sector which is not even, responsive, because it doesn't know enough of what are the requirements of the economic and social dynamics. So you have the economy moving there, and we talk about markets. You need society also changing very quickly, but then you find public sector which does not understand these dynamics and the changes which are required. And because of that, generally speaking, our private sector is ineffective. So reforming public sector. You know what is the other thing? Of the two things which I mentioned, the education system and public sector. After independence, we didn't take the time to discuss what is the system which serves us. We adopted the systems, whether you are the so-called English-speaking country or French-speaking country, Portuguese-speaking country, we adopted their systems of how to operate the public sector without critically saying who we are as Africans, how Africans live, how Africans relate to institutions. And that's why most of our people, the percentage may vary from country to country, but you have two systems moving in parallel. You have the so-called modern state, and as you have the millions of people who are running their lives as if this modern state does not exist. And if they look at the modern state, it's simply for service provision. It's not to engage seriously. You just see, when people seek justice in our countries, African countries, where do they go to? To courts? How many people have access to courts? It's irrelevant for them. And they will go to tribal chiefs, they will go to the internal systems, to churches, etc., etc. But most of what you can call, judiciary for most of Africans on this continent doesn't speak to them. It's too complicated. Those laws, they don't even understand the laws. What kind of public sector is this to serve and to produce social justice in which you have a majority of them outside? So we need to rethink the reform of public sector to absorb many of the ways Africans, our people, relate to one another. They have the institutions, how these institutions can be elevated to be integrated into the modern state. But we are Africans, and there's no way you're going to use the system of Britain and French and Portugal and make it work effectively to the millions. Then we have also, I would suggest that private sector has to rethink itself. And I don't understand much of private sector, but I'm a little bit, I'm going to say this. Our private sector, most of cases, is busy seeing how you become global before you say how we as Africans, we see ourselves in the context of African development, in which then we relate to the global, but having certain issues agreed among ourselves as Africans. I know I'm touching a sensitive nerve, but I would like to ask this question, then you'll continue to discuss. How many of us were very busy, trying to meet the requirements of the World Economic Forum, but we are not very much concerned with building our business communities on the continent, strong ones, like the one you're talking about, the SADC Business Forum, okay? But to have them in all sub-regions, strong enough to engage our regional organizations, but also to engage collectively each one of our governments, because the power of having you as a group talking to Mozambique, talking to Malawi, talking to Tanzania, raising the same issues, but you are a collective voice to reform systems, it is because you are looking at Africa. But you are very busy, some of you are very busy with World Economic Forum, but very little concerned with the African business. I challenge you to build and strengthen the African business fora. Make them sub-regional to be much close to home. Make them African as such. Because we know if you agree at African level, But West Africa has dynamics different from Central Africa. They're different from East Africa, etc. So yes, we need the continental one. But more important to me is the one which is very, very close to where we live, the sub-regional ones. And from the sub-region, that's why you see how you jump to Nigeria, how do you jump to Ethiopia, etc., etc. Because there's also this tendency of saying, oh no, who are the most successful and most important ones? And we choose 5 countries on the continent, and we say they are the ones who are going to drive the economy of the continent. I disagree. If you don't bring in each, you might have them, but if you don't bring in SADC the 15 countries to work together, you might have South Africa being a success, you might have Botswana being a success, but the whole region will be driven back by the majority. You're not going to get that. And we are talking of leaving no one behind, and even in the way we work with countries. So my point is how we build this strong business communities. The other one is private sector has to invest, yes, but moving from the corporate social responsibility to identify, again I go back to the National Pact, and identify what are the obstacles, the structural obstacles which are not allowing the nation to move. It can be in the private sector itself, but it can be in public sector. And invest on that, because in the long run, you understand better than anyone else. You invest today so that in 5, 10 years, you're going to have a better reality. So when you invest in nutrition, for instance, many of you would say, why should I invest in nutrition? But you have to invest in nutrition, because if you have the 43% of African children stunted as we have, they will never develop their brains to the full potential. You are not going to have in future, with the complexity of technology, you are not going to have the workforce which is able to catch up with the requirement of that development. You are talking about the fourth revolution. But remember, many of African people on this continent, they haven't even entered the Industrial Revolution, which was in 1918, it was in the 18th century. They don't even know what electricity is. They don't have, clean water. So you need to look at the continent knowing that as we can go faster to try to do this, but it's about the 1 billion of us. It's about the 600 millions of Africans who have no electricity. It is about, so all this, it means you have to go back and say, where can we as private sector, in our sharing of resources, we invest to make sure that our people are going to be healthy, our children can learn and catch up with the complex notions of modern science and technology. It's not by chance. We only have had on this continent Nobel Prizes in literature and peace. How many do we have in physics? How do we have in maths? How do we have in, now we are talking about biochemistry. How many are there? Africans, even in young ones. It's not by chance. We are lagging behind, and if we had to catch up, we need to invest seriously. When I say system education, I didn't mention seriously, to invest in science. Seriously in science. And how do we make, science very attractive to our children? You know how to do it, and you can help the system to do that. Now, I'm saying what we have in mind as a nation, and we agree to that, we want our nations to be prosperous, to be equitable, social justice. Then you have to invest in social justice. Even if you are, suppose you are in energy, even if you are in telecommunications, you are in mining, you are, wherever you are, you have to say, how do I contribute at the end of the day to build a nation which is prosperous, which is equitable, which is effectively of social justice? And it's in your interest. It's not because you are helping the government. It's because it will come back to haunt you. If you do not contribute to that, business is not going to be sustainable, because the millions of the marginalized, they will attack you. And this country is a good example of this. So we want to prosper in an environment where we give to one another a real opportunity to be a citizen who live in dignity. And because of that, that agenda has to be very clear. It cannot be left just to one of us as you wish. We have to debate clearly, how do we contribute? What are the challenges we have to address and transform, so that we will be then a society of social justice? And I wanted to talk very quickly of knowledge generation. I touched quickly on this. We are very much left behind in terms of, one, to catch up with the science, let alone generate knowledge, to produce knowledge. And we need to make this a core of our national pact in every single country. How do we, on the basis of what we have, doesn't matter how fragile it is, but how are we going to grow that we produce knowledge ourselves? We are not only to absorb what others develop. And it was given an example that even when you use, the top of science, you have to take into account the reality of the continent itself. But the knowledge which is in the hands of people already, which has to be used and to be elevated to integrate the modern system of knowledge. And we have to invest in research. And you know how many of our countries are investing in research. The agreements of the minimum which has to be done. You cannot dream of having society which is developed without a solid knowledge base. And it has to be part of the agenda in accountability, as I was saying, so that even governments are expected to make decisions on the basis of knowledge, evidence-based. Many times they make decisions on the basis of what elections are going to get for them, but it's not necessarily about what society, the dynamics of society is. But if we have that system of accountability, we will ask questions to one another, and we will always bring everyone not to deviate for what the National Pact is saying. Civil society organizations. You know, we have, in our countries, we have a proliferation of civil society organizations. Some of them, yes, they're advocating. They are making some impact because they raise pertinent issues. But we have very little of organizations who are getting their hands dirty implementing policy. Why this is important is because from the national agreements, take it to what does it mean, to have innovative way of delivering health, of delivering education, delivering energy to rural people, to poor people. All those things, we need to have organizations who are implementing at a much lower level so that they will bring innovative ways which can be scaled up, but they will enrich our capacity of implementing what we have agreed in the National Pact. So we need civil society organizations, not only who are implementing, but who are also accountable in the National Pact. Some of them, they are receiving resources from public funds, even if they are not in Africa, whether it's Norway, whether it's Sweden, whether it's US who's giving money, it's public money. So they have to be accountable how they use the public money for the benefit of the majority of African people. But sometimes we move simply in different ways. Government goes in one sense, business people in another direction, civil society in others. We are not talking around the same table on the basis of trust. Trust and trust. And knowing that it is a collective responsibility to make our nations work. And finally, I would like to mention media. It is a powerful tool of how you mold the perceptions and the understanding, modern perception, the understanding of what the nation is or what our continent is. So you need to have a balance between informing, educating, and of course, also making it some sort of interesting for the public. But most of our media, I'm not saying all, please look at some newspapers carefully. In a period of a month, what are the headlines? And you look at I'm not saying we don't have crime. I'm not saying we don't have scandals, but we have much more than that. And it doesn't come clear as a society which has good and bad. It is as if we are only bad. And then it builds a understanding of ourselves as a failed societies. We are not failed societies. We have huge challenges, but we have great things happening. But they don't come across in a balanced way in what the media, and I'm not talking of South African media, I'm talking of African media. So I think here we have, as part of this civil society, citizens as you call it, it is very important that we have media around the table as well to say, tell this story in different angles, the positive and the strengths of who we are, the weaknesses we have, but also tell what are the plans we have to overcome our own weaknesses. It's not only the role of government to do that. The media has that responsibility. And if you look in other parts of the world, you have media which is quite balanced on this. And they're not censored. They simply are minimally. They know what is the importance of the image of a country, the image of a continent. We as women's organizations, we decided that, we're going to try in our own way to build some kind of alternatives of how women are being portrayed in this continent. Because we are tired of being defined as those who are dying of AIDS, those who are being battered, those who are dying of malaria, they are dying at birth. It's also true. And I'm here and I am really advocating that all these things should end. But I take pride of the brilliance of young women we have produced along these years who are doing fantastic things. No one knows about them. And we say, no. We're going to define African women in our own terms, in our own perspective. It is going to be very difficult, but we just have to begin, because we African women, we are not only the negatives. We are strength, we are power, we are energy, we are creativity, and that's what we are going to tell in our own terms. So Africa needs to have also media which defines this continent in its own terms. But most of what we learn and we hear about ourselves, it's not defined here. It's not on the basis of who we are. Finally, I spoke too long. I want to end with, because we are talking about leadership for public, private, and civil society. Ethical leadership. We have to agree on fundamental principles which have to guide whoever take the responsibility of leadership. And I'm saying business as well. I'm not talking of politics, because you can run and think of politics only. We as business, what is the code for us of ethical leadership in business? What is the code for us as civil society organizations as ethical leadership? Sometimes, even when we talk of corruption, if we were to go deep and look at some of our organizations in private sector and civil society organizations, oh yes, they are not less corrupt than the public sector. But we do not look at this as also a collective responsibility to define these codes of conduct in which we support one another to overcome this. We cannot build societies of justice where we don't have a sense of what binds us together and how we should do things. Then finally, I want to say, look at what Japanese business is. Whether they are in the US, whether they are in Africa, or wherever they are, they have a way of being. This is Japanese. Isn't it true? Yeah, and now the Chinese, they come here also, they tell us how they do their business, and we accept. Sometimes things which are outrageous, but we do accept. It's their way of doing business, and because we want money, we accept this. I want to ask, what is the way of doing business of African business? Do we have a code of our, do we have principles? We say, you are Africa. You are an African business. And wherever you are, you have a footprint which you have to leave, which makes you distinctive of the German business, of the British business, of the Japanese business, of the Brazilian business, and say, this is African business, what you're doing. And it has to be based on our value system. So we need to rescue value system of Africans and put it into the way we do business. And when I say do business, I'm not talking only of business as private sector. It is also public life. It is also civil society organizations. And we just have to stop imitating others. Imitating others. And redefine who we are and how we want to be seen, respected with our own dignity as Africans. I think in this transformative leadership which you asked me to try to talk about is to suggest we need to sit and go back to the drawing board together. Public, private, civil society, and then each one of us then, after we have agreed on this, or while we agree on this, to define exactly how do we conduct ourselves? How do we really want to leave in the world a footprint of who Africans are, how they define themselves, how they build their own dignity, they respect themselves, they make them respected by others, and they have a contribution, a huge contribution to give to the world today. I do not have the time. If I had, I would share some of the ideas which are not scientific, of course, just intuitive. But some of the things which I believe are our strengths as Africans, which the world has lost, and we have a responsibility to put that in the global family as a contribution of African as such. That is an issue for research institutions. Some of them we are working with. Maybe one day we will share with the NEPAD Business Foundation. But thank you very much for having me.